Well, the moment we've all been waiting for is finally upon us. We have, at last, the true specs of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. At a glance, it looks like Microsoft has taken an early lead in terms of raw computing power. But is that enough? Do teraflops really make or break a console? Well, probably, but we're going to take a closer look at what both consoles have to offer and what PlayStation may need to do to take the lead in this upcoming war. Now that we have the spec release of the PS5, it's only natural that we want to compare them to the Series X, so let's do that. Starting off with the newly announced PS5. Now, if you managed to actually sit through all of Sony's GDC presentation without falling asleep, you probably know exactly what we're going to talk about. If you were bored to death, however, this should serve as a nice recap. Now, we want to take just a couple of seconds to clear a few things up. The press conference that Sony held was at the GDC, the Game Developer Conference, and was aimed 100% at game developers, which is why it seemed so boring. That's also why we didn't see the console reveal or any gameplay. However, the tech that Sony did reveal was extremely impressive, and we'll get to that later. For now, here are the raw spec comparisons. Sony is rocking an 8-core AMD Zen 2 CPU, clocked at a variable frequency of 3.5 GHz. Their GPU is a custom RDNA 2 clocked at a variable frequency of 2.23 GHz. Boasting up to 10.28 teraflops and 36 CUs. For memory, the PS5 has 16 gigs of GDDR6 RAM. Base storage is 825 gigabytes of custom NVMe flash storage with expandable storage available. The PS5 also supports 4K UHD Blu-ray with the potential of 120 FPS and 8K gaming, as well as ray tracing and backwards compatibility with the PS4 and PS4 Pro. Got all of that? Now, to compare, the processor on the Series X is also an 8-core Zen 2 clocked at a higher, consistent 3.8 GHz, and their GPU, which is also an RDNA 2, clocked lower at 1.825 GHz, but with 52 computational units boasting a hefty 12 teraflops. Microsoft is also rocking a custom NVMe SSD with base storage of 1TB, as well as 16 gigs of GDDR6 RAM. It also supports 4K UHD Blu-ray and the potential for 8K and 120 FPS gaming, as well as ray tracing. The Xbox, however, is backwards compatible with all previous consoles. So if we get to the brass tacks, the Xbox is leading the pack in terms of raw computing power. Teraflops and computational units, or CUs, are basically a way to quantify how much graphical computing power the system has. Essentially, the higher the teraflops and the more CUs, the more complex and high-resolution in-game textures can be. On the Xbox side, we not only have a higher clock speed on the CPU, but more teraflops and more computational units for the GPU. The Xbox also promised far more in terms of backwards compatibility. We don't have specific details as of recording this video, but for now, Microsoft has promised complete backwards compatibility. The PlayStation does edge out the Series X in terms of read and write speeds from their custom flash storage and controllers, but will that make up for a nearly 18% difference in GPU computing power? Only time will tell. We also want to see how this variable frequency is going to work for the PlayStation. Will it improve power consumption and therefore mitigate heat and noise? Or will it cause for frames to start dropping if the CPU starts thermal throttling, which happens when components get too hot? We know that the Xbox is going to be pedal to the metal the entire time, and hopefully there are no thermal limitations there either. Sony is making a big deal of the storage speeds, and in that regard, it's significantly faster than Microsoft's offerings. They both have custom flash chips, but Sony is capable of read and write speeds of up to 9 GB per second of compressed data, versus Microsoft's 6 GB per second. In theory, with both of these consoles, load times should be a thing of the past. With the current gen that we have now, the hard drives are not even fast enough to load textures into games as we run through the world, which is why we have loading screens. In fact, a lot of games have narrow, winding staircases or long elevator rides just to load textures without giving us the actual loading screen. A clever way to get around loading screens, sure, but a huge headache for game developers. Removing or minimizing load times is great, but Sony aims to do a bit more with their storage solution. Their thought process is that by removing any bottlenecks that loading textures and data brings, the CPU and GPU can focus solely on rendering the game, and despite its weaker numbers on paper, the components can work much more efficiently, delivering better performance in a quieter, cooler package. So then, which console is actually going to be better? Well, right now that's impossible to say. If we're talking purely about numbers, the Xbox Series X is the more powerful machine. How that will translate to real-world performance remains to be seen. While we don't have too much more information on the PS5 other than its specs, Microsoft did give us a pretty good look at what to expect from the monster that is the Series X. We think Microsoft has a few advantages so far in this war. Firstly, they came out with a bang and released the console in a pretty big way early on. Meanwhile, Sony has been tight-lipped on the PS5. We haven't even seen the actual hardware and only just recently learned about its specs. Also, even though their GDC conference was just for developers, thousands of gamers watched and were met with a snore fest. When so much of a successful launch is built around hype, Sony is definitely not creating any. Now with the numbers game happening, it's no question that the Series X is on top in people's minds. As we discussed earlier about the technical specifications, the Xbox is simply more powerful. Sony claims to be more thoughtful and intuitive, and if that's true, they may actually have a more powerful console with a better gaming experience. In some cases though, bigger is not always better. If you think about the mobile industry, Android devices usually have larger spec numbers but oftentimes perform the same or worse than iOS because of the efficiency of Apple's software and hardware. Comparing the consoles like this is similar to comparing two supercars in terms of raw horsepower. The one with more horsepower may likely be faster, but we need to consider other variables like weight and aerodynamics. Plus, even if one can reach a higher speed than the other, that doesn't necessarily mean it's better on the track. The truth is though, for now, all we have are these specs, and there's no denying that the Xbox Series X has the hardware advantage as well. Now, a console is nothing without games, and while Sony promised hundreds of PS4 and PS4 Pro titles at launch as well as exclusives, we have no names or ideas of these games. Microsoft has come out of the gate with their Game Pass, which is like a subscription-based service reminiscent of Netflix. While PlayStation Now is half the price of Game Pass still seems like it's the better of the two services. With Game Pass, you're getting exclusive titles delivered right to the service at launch. You get access to discounts on certain games, and it can even be bundled with Xbox Live. Not only that, all 400 games can be directly downloaded to your device to improve gameplay. While Sony does offer 800 games, not all of them can be downloaded, so if you don't have a great internet connection, you might experience some lag and buffering. With Microsoft's Play Anywhere and smart delivery features, they extend the lead even further. Play Anywhere allows you to, well, you guessed it, play anywhere. Microsoft exclusive games can be played both on PC and Xbox and vice versa. Smart delivery ensures that you never have to rebuy a game. If you get Cyberpunk 2077 on the Xbox One X, you can play it when it's released on the Series X at no extra cost. So after all of this, it would seem as though Microsoft has the lead in nearly every category, and if we're looking purely at the spec sheet, that's basically how it is. What would Sony need to do to try to take this lead back? Well, for starters, PSVR was a huge success for the PS4, and it really brought VR to the masses with its ease of use. Going forward, Sony is most likely going to release a PSVR 2. Now, of course, everything about the PSVR 2 is rumored and nothing is confirmed by Sony, but given the success of PSVR, it only makes sense. The question is, what will the new headset bring? Will it just be a spec bump, or will it be completely wireless and bring new hardware like the rumored controller that enables finger tracking? During Sony's conference, Sony's lead system architect Mark Cerny discussed a new breakthrough technology for audio immersion that they called Tempest. In short, Tempest is set to completely immerse you in a game with such high precision that it could even fool you into thinking the sounds are happening in real life. With hundreds of audio panes, the PS5 will be able to pinpoint audio to specific locations, and we believe that this will be crucial when it comes to VR games. Sony said that this feature will be available only through headphones at first, but they plan on releasing the tech to other sound sources such as televisions, where if you're sitting directly in front of the TV, they'll be able to make sounds appear as if they're coming from behind you. Microsoft also revealed that they're taking sound very seriously with their audio ray tracing technology, but it seems as though Sony is taking it to another level. Of course, like with everything else in this video, time will tell. Finally, we have the developers. During the Sony conference, they made it clear that this console was built for the developers.
A lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators.
They went and asked game developers what the most important components were when designing a game and what they can do to improve their process. The answer, according to Sony, was unanimously storage speed, which is why Sony puts so much into their custom SSD. Sony, among many other developers, hate that everything is compared with teraflops. As it is right now, teraflops is a very ambiguous way of measuring power. Not all teraflops are measured equally. Andrea Pacino, founder of Ready at Dawn Studios, said that the PS5 was, quote, one of the most revolutionary, inspired home consoles ever designed. While game director for Naughty Dog said, people don't even know how big of a leap this is in terms of game design. If Sony's vision of how their internal components will work together harmoniously is correct, it's likely that this console is going to be far more capable than the Series X, but that still may not be enough. Sony would need to revamp their PlayStation Now and have exclusive titles available at launch, as well as increase the support for backwards compatibility. They released a statement to clarify that an overwhelming majority of the 4,000 PS4 titles will be playable on the PS5. The question is, when? We'd also love to see support for the PS3, PS2, and even PS1 games. For now, all we can do is wait and see what will happen. Be sure to subscribe to get more updates as news keeps coming in about these new consoles. We're really excited to see what happens. We think that a rising tide raises all ships, and we can't wait to see what Microsoft and Sony have up their sleeves. Do you think that Sony's claims of intuitive hardware is smoke and mirrors to cover up the lower numbers? Is Microsoft going to blow Sony out of the water this year with their improved services and insane hardware specs? Let us know in the comments.